What happened in Oklahoma is deeply troubling. I think we do have to, as a society, ask ourselves some difficult and profound questions around these issues.
President Obama on Friday ordering a federal review of the death penalty after an execution in Oklahoma this week that went horribly wrong. When prison officials botched the lethal injection, the convict struggled for life before succumbing to a heart attack, and that grim episode is now fueling a global debate about justice and death. Here's ABC's Pierre Thomas.
Torture. That's how Clayton Lockett's attorneys described the state of Oklahoma's botched attempts to execute him Tuesday night. They say it violated the Supreme Court's ruling that capital punishment must be humane. Witnesses of the execution, which involved the use of a new 3-drug combination, said it was gruesome.
He was on the gurney, still writhing, grimacing, making noises.
Clayton Lockett was tortured to death.
Critics of the death penalty believe the problematic execution will erode the country's support for capital punishment. The public has become more skittish, in part because over 140 inmates on death row have been exonerated since 1973. 18 states have abolished the practice, 6 since 2007. But while support for the death penalty has fallen from 80% in 1993 to 60% in 2013, a significant majority of Americans still believe in it.
How else are we going to deal with the cop killers, the baby killers, the mass murderers, and the serial killers?
Mark Klass's daughter Polly was raped and murdered in 1993. He has little sympathy for murderers like Lockett, who shot 19-year-old Stephanie Neiman with a sawed-off shotgun and watched as his accomplices buried her alive.
This isn't about Clayton Lockett. This isn't about his victimization. This is about a heinous and unforgiving criminal act that he committed against an innocent young woman.
Oklahoma turned to a new lethal cocktail after European pharmaceutical companies refused to provide previously used drugs.
We had received neither any testing data nor any assurances that the drugs to be used in those executions had been tested.
Matters of life and death, crime and punishment, never easy. For This Week, Pierre Thomas, ABC News, Washington.
Let's bring this back to the roundtable now. Cookie, let me begin with you. You saw in Pierre's piece still 60% support for the death penalty, yet we've seen a series of botched executions, some moratoriums in some states.
And many doctors who won't do them.
Who will not. That's the problem with the injections. So is the death penalty days numbered?
I don't think so, and I'm sorry about that. I am one of those seamless-webbed Catholics, and I think that that the death penalty implicates us all in the state sponsorship of death. But I think that that the American people still, clearly, we see 60% still supporting it, despite the fact that innocent people are on death row, and innocent people who are not on death row, but who have life sentences, are not even paid any attention to. It's only the people on death row who get some lawyers who try to pay attention and get them off.
Ends up being quite expensive as well.
I think in 2013 there were about 3,000 people on death row. Only, I think, 2% of those were executed. Very small number, 39 people. I am troubled by the fact that there are people who have been exonerated through DNA. That's horrific, and we have to do something about that. The idea that it's cruel and unusual. Court handled it in 1977. That's not going to change. But I do think these images are going to have some, perhaps, political impact in the anti-death penalty crowd, of which President Obama is not, by the way.
I guess
they're going to seize on this. But my heart is with the victims of abortion and of the death penalty, because Koki's right. I mean, a culture of life must be respected, but across the board.
I guess one of the questions is going to be: do all these problems with lethal injections turn it into something that is cruel and unusual? But I want to bring this to David Plouffe. You saw the president announce that review this week. As Laura pointed out, he's been a supporter of the death penalty. Some wondering now, given all these questions, if we're going to see a reversal or evolution, much like he had on gay marriage, by the end of his term come out strongly against the death penalty.
I'd be surprised. I mean, he spoke specifically, in issues of terrorism and crimes against children. He believes it's appropriate. I do think it's going to change. I think you see younger people, millennials, opposing this more strongly than people who are older. You see the countries that are part of the death penalty club, Iran, North Korea, China. Right. So I do think attitudes are going to change. It's remarkable. In 1993, as you mentioned, 80% support. When Bill Clinton went back to Arkansas during 1992 and Ricky Ray Rector, so the politics of this have changed, not as quickly as gay marriage, but that's a pretty big swing in a generation, and my suspicion is you'll see it swing further.
Rick Santorum, for supporters of the death penalty, how do you address the problems?
Well, first off, I'm someone who has struggled with that issue for a long time and believe that we have to have very narrow applications for the death penalty, and maybe we need to focus those a little bit more as maybe a halfway point between eliminating. But I do believe for extreme cases, David mentioned a couple of them, that we have to have that ability to take someone who's a danger to society out of society. And I think that's if we could have a debate maybe of narrowing down the cases. Some of the reasons for death penalty, at least I remember passing them back in the late 80s, early 90s for drug kingpins and things like that. Right. I mean, those are things I think we should probably back away and
stop adding on.
Yes. I think we've stopped adding on. Well, the question is maybe whether we should narrow.
That was, of course, because the federal government has very little to do with this, right. And so the president saying he's going to have a review is just saying something. And the Congress was doing that about the country was worried about drugs, and the Congress was saying, well, we're going to do something about drugs, and so they did the drug kingpins. But the truth is, the other aspect of this, and I know you want to get in on this subject probably, is that it's racist. I mean, we really do see a real racial division among those who get capital punishment and those who do not.
Right? I was going to mention that in some states, people for the same crime 3 times more likely to sentence an African-American defendant to death. I think that's very, very troubling. The other thing is, as other countries back away from this, as the medical profession backs away, you're now seeing this guy was basically a lab experiment. I mean, there was nobody had any clear idea what the cocktail was. They wouldn't tell. So now you've got a situation where you have innocence as a big issue that people are concerned about, race is an issue, and now you're literally just rolling the dice and making up the cocktail to kill people. That, I think, gives the Department of Justice a reason to take a big step back here.
I think, look, we do have a problem in our culture, a broader culture, a culture of death to some extent. We saw that with the Gosnell case, late-term abortions, the heinous things happening in the womb to children, and you don't want to equate it, but innocence, right? There could be innocent people probably today on death row. Right. There's a lot of innocent life. Forget the early-term abortion, late-term abortion, that I think young people as well are changing their minds about the issue of abortion.
That's true.
One other issue, you were just mentioning race. Of course, race front and center this week with the Clippers controversy, Donald Sterling. I talked to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar up at the start. Let me bring this question to you, Van Jones. We saw that forceful action by Adam Silver at the beginning of the week, but now they may be hamstrung if Sterling's going to fight. So what does the NBA do?
Well, first of all, you got to give him a lot of credit for stepping forward. A lot of players were saying they would actually go on strike if something weren't done. So you got to give Silver real credit for stepping forward and dealing with this. But there's a deeper issue here nobody's talking about. There are about 100 teams. You look at basketball, baseball, football. There's only 2, as best I can tell, 2 non-white principal owners in the entirety of American sports. So you can, hey, look at this one guy, look at this one guy. Hold on a second. You got a whole bunch of people of color out there sweating it on the field, and you got a whole bunch of white folks who actually own it. That looks more like 1814, not 2014. Well, and that's the real racial issue everybody wants to talk about.
And the thing in his remarks that was in some ways the most offensive was not even the horrible stuff he was saying about, I don't want blacks coming to the game. It was, I feed them,
very paternalistic.
It was
this
like
stuff sounds like 1814 stuff.
And so,
I will say one thing about this. I was very, very proud to see how big the response was throughout American society. Newt Gingrich actually came out, my co-host on Crossfire, and said, you know what? Let's stop this whole billionaires club on ownership. Let the community buy in, like they do with the Green Bay Packers. So I think maybe folks in Los Angeles should buy the team.
It was remarkable, Rick Santorum, the way the whole country seemed to rise up like that.
It was great. I mean, I think the reaction was uniform. My concern was, where was the reaction from the NBA years ago when they knew this man had these points of view and did nothing? And it's only when it became an issue of money and branding that they actually responded. And I think the NBA has to do some real soul searching about how they handled that and, frankly, other issues that go on in that place.
Yeah, I think Adam Silver, you pointed out, he handled it, perfectly, kind of an A+ in terms of crisis management. I think it does raise a lot of issues that have been talked about here today. I think ultimately, though, it was interesting. The reaction was uniform. I think it was across ideological lines, across age lines. It was great. There's also a lesson here, not so much about basketball, but again, John Kerry had a moment. Nothing's off the record anymore.
No such thing as privacy at all. No way.
The lesson has to be relearned and relearned.
George, the one thing is the girlfriend/personal assistant with Barbara says she reveals that, at some point I began to be paid off the books, meaning he now has tax fraud violation.
All kinds of new problems.
Lots of things happening.
Great roundtable. Thank you all very much.